Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to live show 124, Dr. Trumplove, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Wars. For those who haven't understood the reason for the title, it's a play off the 1964 movie Dr. Strangelove, How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Bomb. It's a black comedy of the Cold War. And I'm coming to you live from Minsk, Belarus, where it's just slightly after 8 p.m. on April 6, 2025. And let's buckle up because tonight's show is packed with the stuff they don't want you to hear. We've got a lot to unpack. First, Dr. Trumplove's war pivot. How President Trump, the guy who swore he'd keep us out of wars, has done a full 180. We're talking about ramped up support for Israel's bombing runs in Gaza and beyond, US airstrikes lighting up Yemen, the wild threats against Iran, Panama, Greenland, and, get this, Canada. What happened to America first? Then we've got the mysterious deaths of 4 US servicemen in Lithuania. Something stinks. What's the real story? And I'll dig in. Next, I'm tearing into the New York Times' latest propaganda drop from March 29, 2025, The Secret History of America's Involvement in the Ukraine War. Spoiler alert, it's a steaming pile of lies, and I've got the receipts. Also, we'll break down Trump's tariff gambit, economic genius or global train wreck, plus navigating the new global order with World War III vibes heating up. We'll look at shifting alliances, power plays shaping our future. And speaking of war, what's the deal with Yemen? Are we staring at another US war crime? On top of that, I'll bring you the latest of the EU, Ukraine, Belarus, Greenpeace, and why not? We have a bizarre UFO story tied to the CIA and Russia. And we'll finish off with some tech news from China and Japan. And while we're at it, I'd also like to thank all those who have subscribed to our Rumble, now numbering over 9,200, and those subscribed to YouTube, numbers over 3,300, with just 700 subscribing to YouTube in the last couple of weeks. Seems I must be unshadow banned. Finally. So hit that thumbs up, share on your socials, subscribe to our channels, and drop a comment in the chat, and I'll read some of them best take live. And if you're feeling generous, send a rant via Rumble chat with some cash, and I'll definitely shout you out and read your comment. Let's get to it on tonight's show. The show starts now with no stars required. Let's get into it. Oop, here we go. Dr. Trumplove, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Wars. During his campaign and throughout his political career, Donald Trump often has positioned himself as a maverick outsider, a man who would break from the entrenched war hawks of Washington and urge in an era of peace. He touted his first term as free of new wars, a rarity for a modern US president, and promised a foreign policy rooted in restraint, deal-making, and America-first pragmatism. Yet, as we stand in April 2025, just months into his latest tenure, the reality of Trump's presidency paints a starkly different picture. Far from being an anti-war figure, his supporters herald Trump's recent actions reveal a leader not only comfortable with military aggression, but seemingly eager to escalate conflicts across the globe, from supporting Israel's bombing campaigns to threatening invasions of sovereign nations like Panama, Greenland, and even Canada, and attacking Iran. Trump's rhetoric and policies have taken a sharp turn towards warmongering. Call him Dr. Trumplove because he's learned to stop worrying and love the wars. A campaign built on peace, a presidency built on bombs. Trump's appeal to many voters has long rested on his claim to reject an endless wars of his predecessors. He criticized the Iraq War, mocked the neoconservative obsession with regime change, and promised to bring troops home. Yet, the ink was barely dry on his second inauguration before the bombs started falling. In Yemen, one of the poorest nations in the Middle East, the US military under Trump's command has unleashed relentless campaigns of airstrikes targeting the Houthi rebels. This is aimed at curbing their attacks on the Red Sea shipping. These strikes have been far more intense than those under the Biden administration, with reports of lots of civilian casualties mounting. Trump has bragged about decimating the Houthis, a group backed by Iran, showing little concern for humanitarian crisis, making it worse by US bombs already in the war-torn country. This is not restraint of a peace president, it's a swagger of a man reveling in military might. Israel's blank check. Then there's Israel. Trump has long been a staunch ally of Israel government, but his latest term has seen him double down on unconditional support for its military operations. Since the collapse of the fragile Gaza ceasefire in early 2025, Israel has resumed its bombardment of Palestinian territories with US-supplied weapons and tactic approval from the White House. Far from urging de-escalation, Trump has cheered on the destruction, framing it as necessary to counter Iran's regional influence. Critics argue this amounts to a complicity in the genocidal campaign, with thousands of civilians, many of them children, killed or disabled. The man who once claimed he broke the deal of the century for Middle East peace now seems to be content to let the bombs fall, as long as they align with his strategic interests and appease his base. Speaking of Iran, Trump's rhetoric has grown increasingly belligerent. After withdrawing from the Iranian nuclear deal in his first term, he's now pressurizing a maximum pressure campaign 2.0, threatening Tehran with military strikes if it doesn't capitulate to his demands for a new agreement. Reports indicate of a significant US military buildup in the region, with stealth bombers and naval assets positioned for a potential strike, which we reported in the last show. Trump's letter to the Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, offered talks with a 2-month ultimatum, was laced with threats of annihilation, a cry from a diplomatic finesse he once claimed to wield. Iran, defiant and enriching uranium at near weapons-grade levels, shows no sign of backing down, raising the spectre of catastrophic war that could engulf the Middle East. For a president who said he'd avoid such quagmires, Trump seems itching to pull the trigger. The absurdity of imperial ambitions. Perhaps the most surreal of Trump's threats to invade Panama, Greenland and Canada, nations that pose no credible threat to the US security. His fixation on Panama stems from the desire to reclaim control of the Panama Canal, which he called a rip-off for America. Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, remains a bizarre obsession, with Trump musing about its strategic value and reportedly tasked aides to study the cost of a takeover. And Canada, the idea of invading a peaceful neighbour and NATO ally over trade disputes or vague notions of security, is the stuff of dystopian fiction, yet Trump has floated it with alarming nonchalance. These aren't the musings of peacemaker, they're the fantasy of an imperialist drunk on power, willing to destabilise the Western Hemisphere for no discernible gain. And the hypocrisy laid bare. Trump's supporters might argue that these actions are about strength, not war, that he's projecting power to deter adversaries. But the line between deterrence and aggression blurs when bombs are falling, troops are amassing, and sovereign nations are threatened with conquest. The Yemen campaign alone contradicts every anti-war promise Trump ever made, while his backing of Israel's onslaught and saber-rattling towards Iran suggest a man who thrives on conflict, not on resolution. His threats against Panama, Greenland and Canada only underscore this absurdity of the pivot. A president who once decried nation building now dreams of empire building. In the end, Dr. Trumplove's transformation is complete. The man who sold himself as a cure for America's war-weary soul has embraced the very militarism he once scorned. Whether it's bombs over Yemen, a blank check for Israel, or wild threats against neighbours, Trump's actions betray his words. He's not against wars, he's just against losing them. And as the world braces for the fallout, one thing is clear: peace was never the goal, power was. So has there been a war crime in Yemen by the USA? A video posted by Donald Trump on his Truth Social account showing an airstrike that killed over a dozen Yemenis labelled as Houthis standing in a circle is increasingly suspected, depicting a potential war crime. The footage may actually capture a US strike targeting a tribal meeting, a common practice in Yemeni tribal society unrelated to the Houthis, as you can see in the video here on that side of me. Meanwhile, the Houthis have also downed another MQ-9 Reaper drone, marking the 17th drone they've shot down. And the US military campaign against the Houthis has cost over $1 billion, with high expensive yielding limited results. Pentagon officials acknowledge partial success and destroying the Houthis' underground stockpiles of missiles, drones, launchers since March 15th. The US has carried out strikes against expensive GPS-guided glide bombs and Tomahawk cruise missiles in Houthi-controlled northern and central Yemen. These operations, authorized by President Trump, were in response to the Houthis' renewed attacks on Israel-linked ships in the Red Sea, which has followed a blockade of the Gaza Strip. There's some meetings of the Houthis, which happen all the time. US bloodlust, the New York Times vile Ukraine war lie. The New York Times puked up a rancid pile of horseshit on March 29, 2025, with The Secret History of America's Involvement in the Ukraine War by Adam Enteris. Armed with 300 interviews, fakes a glimpse at the US death grip in this bloodbath. But don't buy the act. This isn't some gutsy bombshell. It's a snivelling, arse-licking fraud that cloaks the real abominations. American generals, war-crazed, drooling freaks who turned Ukraine into a mass grave, cheered Russian deaths, whined for more Ukrainian teens to shred, and fused with NATO's war criminals in a kill chain orgy. The Times wants a crown for truth. I'm here to smash their lying faces with it. So the opponents of the Democrats and Biden's shitshow have torn off the veil off, spilling dirt the Times won't dare touch. Beyond the obscene weapon dumps, 500 million rounds, 10,000 javelins, 3,000 stingers, 272 howitzers, 76 tanks, 40 HIMARS, 20 Mi-17s, 3 Patriots, the US and NATO have been feeding Ukraine puppet masters intel and steering strikes. In 2022, they spawned the Dragon Task Force in Wiesbaden, Germany, US Army Europe Africa HQ, a sewer of generals from the CIA, NSA, SBU, National Geo Intelligence Agency and NATO goons, jerking strings for airstrikes on Russia and ground ops. 20 Ukrainian drones, intel hacks, planners, comm geeks grovelled for these psychopaths. Renamed Ebrus in 2023, the god of darkness, this crew handed Ukraine precision HIMARS for long-range kills, drooling over every Russian body they bagged. The Times nods at Weizenbad, but skips the gore-drenched guts because they're spineless. So let's peel back the rot. These guys didn't just help, they ran the slaughter, picking targets, slinging coordinates and sanctifying HIMARS and attack-em strikes like deranged kids burning ants. They prodded Ukraine to bomb Russian soil, panting for a bigger shitstorm. The Times gloats about early cheap shots, Ukraine torching the 58th Combined Arms Army in 2022 with America's cheat codes, but bolts when Russia didn't fold. They shifted, adapted and kept smashing. 20% of Ukraine's is theirs, Kursk is a dark laugh, and Ukraine's counteroffensive are ash piles. If the US is so fucking brilliant, why is Russia still gutting the board? The Times won't mutter it. They're too busy slurping NATO's filth. The leaks get better and nastier. Dragon, Ebrus, handed Ukraine drone boat tech prototypes built for China's Navy, pimped by the CIA, US Navy and UK to blast Russia's Black Sea fleet in the Crimea. They guided Storm Shadow, Scalp missiles too, likely pulled the triggers themselves. Those genius Ukrainian videos, a steaming lie to mask the Western toys and Chinese knockoffs. Even a European intelligence chief, stunned by the rot spilled to opponents. They're part of the kill chain now, he said, of this NATO counterparts, neck deep in Ukrainian ops. The Times won't say it, but the truth screams. Ukraine's greatness is a myth. They're dumb meat for NATO's grinder. Without this tech and intel, Ukraine would be a ghost by now. Instead, the Times spews this smug slop about Russia being brain dead. Oafs who luck into wins. Ram that fairy tale straight to hell. That's not reporting, it's Pentagon fever dream scrawling in gore. Russia's no pushover. They're a relentless death engine, shredding the West script with cold steel. They've bled oceans. Wars are bastard, but they've danced circles around America's swollen ego. The Times can't stomach it, so they fling snotty jabs about Russian fuck-ups while Ukraine's fronts turn into ash. If Russia's such a punchline, why is Zelensky pimping teens to die in this pit? The article's too yellow to choke out the answer. Then comes the gutless blame dump. The Times wails over Ukraine's dry ammo, broken souls and falling lines. General Markinov's sobbing about doom. Zelensky's begging for crumbs. Cue the pity party. But fuck that. Who threw them into this shredder? The US shoveled $66.5 billion, probably triple, knowing their greasy books, and ran this nightmare like unhinged overlords. And here's the kicker. Those generals bitched that Ukraine wasn't mobilizing enough 18-year-olds, literally kids, to feed their meat grinder. These 6 fucks were just okay with the carnage. They were pissed that it wasn't a bigger teen bloodbath. If Ukraine's dying, it's not because they're frail, it's because America's generals are rabid failures at their own death game. The Times wants you to damn Kiev's weakness, but this is a flaming spear screaming US is shit. They lit the prior, tossed the gas, and now play dumb as it rages. Choke on your lies. Here's the molten core of the Times berries. These generals are feral beasts who wanted Ukrainians and Russians dead and whined when teen meat wasn't flowing enough. Every missile, every target, every escalation, it's a dual murder spree, stacking bodies like sick trophies. They didn't care who got shredded, Ukrainian kids or Russian grunts, as long as the kill count soared and their war lust stayed rock hard. The leaks confirm it. Dragon, Ebrus, orchestrated terrorist hits on Sevastopol beaches, Belgorod streets, Donetsk squares, civilian blood on their hands. NATO's in the kill chain, neck deep and loving it. These aren't ops, they're war crimes, signed by named generals and no expiration date. The Times calls it a strategy gone sour. Bullshit. It's a slaughter orgy run by crackling lunatics who glassed both nations for a medal and tested their toys while they were at it. The hypocrisy is a stench that killed a vulture. They smear Russia as a devil, but America and NATO are the ones gutting Ukraine, giggling over Russian graves and whining for more teens to butcher. The Times does this slimy tap dance crack the horror open, then twirl to Ukrainian grit. Meanwhile, Russia keeps winning, not because they're gods, but because they're stubborn as fuck, and the US keeps gagging on its own pride. The Times won't roar it, so I will. This war's a killing floor, and America's generals, hand in hand with NATO's kill chain war criminals, are the gore-soaked reapers. So in conclusion, the New York Times can shove its fake-ass bravery into the pit of hell. This isn't reporting, it's a perfume mask for a US-NATO genocide that's drowned Ukraine and Russia in blood, tested their war toys and demanded more 18-year-olds for fueling the fire. America's generals and their NATO kill chain buddies just aren't flops, they're rabid freaks jacking off to Ukraine teens and Russian corpses in a twisted death fetish. Russia's no saint, but they're not the bumbling clowns here. They're the ones smirking while the West plots rots. The Times won't say it, but they're too busy deep-throating the war machine. So wake the fuck up. This isn't freedom. It's American and NATO psychopaths bathing in slaughter, craving more bodies to break. Those medal-chasing, team-hungry war pigs. They're the devils we should hunt, try, and bury. The mysterious deaths of 4 US soldiers, swamp accident or Ukraine cover-up. Here's the mysterious deaths of 4 US soldiers in Lithuania, a timeline that just doesn't add up. On March 31st, 2025, a US Army announced 3 of 4 soldiers missing since March 25 had been found inside their M88 Hercules armoured vehicle submerged in a swamp near the Belarusian border in Lithuania. The 4th soldier's body was reportedly recovered on April 1st, bringing the tragic end to a week-long search and recovery effort.
We told you last week about those 3 soldiers who went missing in Lithuania. They have now, sadly, tragically been found dead. Search and rescue recovery efforts are still underway for the last remaining soldier. Lithuanian officials say a U.S. armored vehicle went missing during a training exercise last week west of the border with Belarus. It was retrieved from a swamp after a 6-day search. Hundreds of Lithuanian and U.S. personnel have been part of the search.
si trova, no Trumplove.
The official story is that these soldiers, all from the 1st Armoured Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division, based in Fort Stewart, Georgia, perished during a routine training exercise when their 70-ton vehicle sank into a peat bog and just drove past this sign that says no tanks past this point. The soldiers were identified as Staff Sergeant Jose Juarez Jr., Sergeant Staff Edwin Franco, and PFC Duante and Staff Sergeant Troy Kunsund Collins.
Mobilized tactical vehicle in Lithuania in the early hours of March 25th. Tragically, 3 soldiers were found deceased in Lithuania yesterday, and it pains me to confirm that today the 4th soldier was also found deceased. The President, the Secretary of Defense, and the entire White House are praying for the victims' friends and family during this unimaginable time. This is another stark reminder of the selfless sacrifice of our brave military men and women who risk their lives around the world every day to keep us safe. God bless them.
But as the details trickle out, the timeline, logistics and circumstances of this incident raise more questions than answers, leading to speculate that this accident might be a convenient cover for a darker truth, that these soldiers could have been killed elsewhere, possibly in Ukraine, with Lithuania serving as a staged backdrop. A timeline riddled with holes, the official narrative states that the 4 soldiers went missing in the early hours of March 25th, 2025, while on a mission to recover another army vehicle during a training exercise in Lithuania, and a town just 10 kilometers from the Belarusian border. The M88 Hercules was discovered submerged in 4.5 meters of water on March 26, and after her 6-day effort involving US, Lithuanian, Polish and Estonian forces, the vehicle was pulled from the swamp on March 31st. 3 bodies were found inside that day, with the 4th soldier's body located the following day on April 1st. So let's break this down. The soldiers were reported missing on Tuesday, March 25th, yet their vehicle wasn't located until Wednesday, March 26th, despite the training area being a controlled military zone with presumably robust oversight. How does a 70-ton armoured vehicle vanish for over 24 hours in a NATO training ground without immediate detection? The swamp's challenging terrain, described as a mix of deep water, thick mud and clay, allegedly complicated the recovery, yet the operation escalated into a multinational effort involving hundreds of personnel, Navy divers and tons of equipment. If the vehicle sank so quickly and deeply, how did it take a full day to even find it? And why did it take 6 days to extract it when the US military has advanced recovery capabilities? Moreover, the soldiers were on the maintenance mission to retrieve another vehicle. The M88 Hercules is designed for battlefield recovery under hostile conditions, so why would it succumb to catastrophically to a swamp during a peaceful exercise? Reports suggest the vehicle drove into the swamp and sank rapidly, but the M88 weighs 63 to 70 tons and is built for rugged terrain. Swamps can be treacherous, but for a vehicle of this size to disappear beneath 15 feet of water and mud without any apparent distress call or immediate response strains credibility. Inconsistencies in the narrative. The details of the incident itself are murky. The Army has not released a clear explanation how an M88 ended up in the swamp, whether it was a driver error, mechanical failure, or just environmental misjudgment. The Lithuanian Defense Minister speculated that the vehicle may have gone diagonally to the bottom, but this vague statement offers little clarity. The soldiers were part of Operation Atlantic Resolve, a NATO mission to bolster the alliance's eastern flank amid Russia's war in Ukraine. The town's proximity to Belarus, a Russian ally, adds a geopolitical layer, yet there's no indication of enemy action, only an accident. The recovery effort while impressive, also raises eyebrows. Hundreds of personnel, including US Navy divers, worked tirelessly in zero visibility conditions to attach cables to the vehicle, which was finally extracted at 4:40 a.m. on March 31st. 3 bodies were found inside, but the 4th soldier was missing until the next day. If all 4 were in the vehicle when it sank, how did one body end up outside? Was he ejected during the sinking, or did he escape and perish elsewhere? The Army hasn't clarified this, and the delay in finding the 4th soldiers despite the concentrated search feels inconsistent with the contained incident. A possible Ukraine connection? Here's where speculation takes hold. The US has been deeply involved in supporting Ukraine against Russia, though it officially avoids direct combat involvement. Lithuania, a staunch NATO ally and vocal supporter of Ukraine, lies near the conflict zone, with Belarus, a key Russian staging ground, just across the border. Could these soldiers have been deployed on a covert mission in Ukraine, perhaps near the Belarusian frontier, and met a fatal end there? The swamp incident might serve as a plausible explanation to mask their true location and cause the death, avoiding the political fallout of admitting US casualties in Ukraine. And the timing supports this theory. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, ongoing since 2022, has escalated tensions across the region. The 3rd Infantry Division's deployment to Europe in January 2025 was explicitly tied to deterring Russian aggression. If these soldiers were killed in Ukraine, say, during the reconnaissance or support operation gone wrong, transporting their bodies and staging an accident in Lithuania could preserve the narrative of non-involvement while honouring the fallen discreetly. The M88 submersion in the swamp could have been engineered post-mortem, with a prolonged recovery effort buying time to align the story. Why the cover-up? If this theory holds, the motivation is clear: geopolitics. Admitting US troops' deaths in Ukraine could inflame an already volatile situation, potentially drawing NATO into direct conflict with Russia. Lithuania, as a NATO member hosting US forces, provides safe stage for such a deception. The emotional outpouring from Lithuanian leaders, like the president, heartfelt condolences, and the massive multinational response might reflect a genuine grief or a coordinated effort to sell a story. The soldiers' identities, released on April 3rd, adds an element, but no concrete answers. They were young, dedicated, dog-faced soldiers, as Major General Christopher Norrie called them. Their loss is undeniable, but the how and where remains suspect. So there is unanswered questions. Until the Army releases a detailed investigation, assuming it ever does, the Lithuanian swamp incident will linger as a puzzle. Why did routine exercises end in such a bizarre tragedy? Why the delays in detection and recovery? And why does the official account feel so incomplete? The possibility that these deaths occurred in Ukraine, with Lithuania as a cover, isn't proven, but the timeline's inconsistency and the incident's oddities make it a theory worth considering. For now, the swamp holds its secrets, and the truth may be buried deeper than the M88 ever was. And now, navigating the new global order of the ongoing saga of the current World War III. So, determining the precise boundaries of various spheres of influence in the multipolar world and formalising them into an agreement will be a complex and prolonged process, but it won't happen overnight. Until a formal agreement is reached among the world's major powers, much like the Congress of Vienna after the Napoleonic Wars, the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, and the Yalta Conference at the close of World War II, World War III will continue. While the direct kinetic war between the US, Russia and China cannot be ruled out, it remains an unlikely scenario at this point. Instead, we're likely to see a continual mix of proxy wars, economic conflicts, financial warfare, cyber attacks, biological warfare, deniable sabotage, and information warfare as these powers compete to expand their spheres of influence, until an agreement is reached to formally end World War III. And as you can see here behind me on the map is an emerging multipolar world as I see it today. Let's have a look. So defining the new spheres of influence, some boundaries are relatively clear. The Western Hemisphere will undoubtedly remain under US influence. Russia's sphere will include Eastern Europe and parts of Central Asia, while China will centre on East Asia. However, where exactly the lines will be drawn between these zones remains a significant question. Take East Asia, for example. Taiwan is almost sure to be reunited with China in some form. The US cannot prevent this, and Washington will likely acknowledge Taiwan as part of China's sphere of influence. And what about South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines? The US is unlikely to abandon its alliance with them completely. Can China accept South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, remaining US allies? If not, what actions will Beijing take? For World War III to conclude, the US and China must agree on the boundaries of their respective spheres of influence in East Asia, but that doesn't seem imminent. The competition between Washington and Beijing in East Asia and beyond is set to continue. And what about the Middle East's role in the emerging world order? The Middle East presents one of the biggest uncertainties in the emerging multipolar world. Where will the new boundaries be drawn? The region is further complicated by the presence of powerful regional players like Turkey, Israel, and Iran, all who have their own interests. The US, Russia, and China will not only need to define their roles in the Middle East, but also these regional actors. There's no sign of resolution anytime soon. The region remains volatile, and potentially for a regional conflict, escalation into a global confrontation remains a real possibility, especially between the US, Israel, and Iran. The key question of Iran's role in the multipolar world and whether the US and Israel will accept it. And what about Europe? While it seems clear that Eastern Europe will fall under Russia's sphere, the fate of Western and Central Europe remains uncertain. As part of Trump's foreign policy shift, it appears the US government has effectively ended the war in Ukraine, but all ensuring Russia's anticipated victory. Losing the Ukraine war will be a bitter pill for supporters of the unipolar world order. Yet, it was always inevitable that they could face a harsh reality check after wagering so much blood, treasure, and credibility on a conflict they were never positioned to win. Russia's victory in Ukraine will carry enormous downstream consequences, particularly for Europe and NATO. The existential question for Western Europe is, what will happen to NATO? Will it remain unchanged? Will it weaken? Will it dissolve altogether? I believe there's a strong likelihood that NATO is neither headed for a major reconstruction or could be dissolving entirely. The political will of the US to continue subsidizing Western Europe's security has significantly diminished. Western European nations are unlikely to welcome these shifts, but their reliance on US security through NATO for decades has left them vulnerable. Will they move away from EU integration and back towards national sovereignty? If so, what are all these geopolitical consequences? The role of Africa in a multipolar world remains undefined. The US, China, and Russia will all have vested interest in the continent, but the boundaries of their respective influences are unclear. Africa could become a major theatre for economic, financial, and even military competition between these global powers. Major regional players like Brazil, India, and Pakistan will need to secure their place in a multipolar world without provoking the US, China, or Russia. History shows that borders are often redrawn when global power structures shift. This could happen across Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and East Asia, and possibly even the Western Hemisphere. Trump has made no secret of his desire to incorporate Canada, Greenland, and Panama into the US. His comments should be understood within the broader context of the emerging multipolar world. So here's the bottom line. A lot remains unresolved before we can say World War III is over. Key unresolved geopolitical flashpoints in the transition to multipolar world include the Middle East, Western and Central Europe, Africa, South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, Brazil, India, Pakistan, and other regional powers. Until a formal agreement is reached to define these boundaries, just as past world conflicts were settled, World War III will persist, bringing massive global consequences. And in conclusion, the transition to a multipolar world marks a pivotal chapter in global history, one fraught with unnecessity and tension. As the great powers jockey for position, the absence of a clear resolution prolongs this new phase of World War III. Whether through negotiation or conflict, the eventual delineation of spheres of influence will shape the international order for decades to come. Until then, the world remains in a state of flux, with the potential for both cooperation and confrontation hanging in the balance. Trump's tariff gambit, a new era of protectionism, or the receipt for global chaos. Last night, Donald Trump took the stage once again, delivering a performance that blended bombast with policy in a way only he can. The centerpiece of his speech was a sweeping proposal for draconian tariffs and duties on goods from nearly every corner of the globe, from Europe to uninhabited penguin-populated islands, likely tax havens in disguise. Few were spared from the former president's economic wrath. The message was clear. Last night, Donald Trump took the stage once again, delivering a performance that blended bombast with policy on the only way he can. The centerpiece of his speech was a sweeping proposal for draconian tariffs and duties on goods from nearly every corner of the globe, from Europe to uninhabited penguin-populated islands. Few were spared from the president's economic wrath. The message was clear. America's trade policy is about to get a lot tougher, and Trump is betting big on reshaping the global economic landscape to favour the United States. And there's a global hit list. Europe, despite its increasingly frosty relationship with the US, received a relatively measured jab. Tariffs were imposed, but with a touch more restraint than elsewhere. China, however, bore the brunt of Trump's ire, with steep duties aimed squarely at its economic juggernaut. Even Ukraine, which Trump sarcastically dubbed great friends while tossing in a derogatory jab, wasn't spared, slapping a 10% duty. Curiously, absent from the list, Russia and Belarus. The explanation from Trump's camp was blunt: we don't trade with them, rendering terrorists unnecessary. It's a rare moment of exclusion that speaks volumes about the current state of US-Russia relations, but more on that later. Even the most remote outposts weren't safe. Trump's mention of uninhabited islands with penguins might sound like a throwaway line, but it's likely a nod to offshore jack shelters and shell companies registered in places like the British Antarctic Territory. If true, it's a signal that Trump's team has done its homework, targeting not just nations, but the shadowy financial networks that crisscross the globe. The grand plan, energy, industry, and American revival. At its core, Trump's tariff blitz is less about punishing others and more about fueling a grand vision for America. He's playing a high-stakes game, once aimed at securing energy resources and dragging manufacturing back to the US soil. The strategy: hammer global markets with provocative statements, let the financial chaos ripple, and allow his inner circle to cash in on the volatility. It's a playbook he's used before: disrupt, profit, repeat. But the rhetoric doesn't stop there. Trump's promised tax cuts for Americans and, in a bold flourish on Russian TV, vowed to tackle the US staggering national debt. This isn't about propping up Wall Street's house of cards, futures, derivatives, and inflated exchange, as he's put it. Instead, he's pitching a return to tangible production, factories humming, goods rolling off assembly lines, a new industrial age for America. Its nostalgic vision once harkens back to the mid-20th century, when the US was the world's undisputed manufacturing titan. And Russia's place in the puzzle. For Russia, the implications are grim. Russia's plans offers little upside for the country. He still views as a geopolitical foe. While Russia escaped the tariff list, the omission isn't an olive branch, it's a cold acknowledgement of the already severe economic strained relationship. And the reports of the US military involvement in strikes on the Russian cruiser Moskov and the Crimean Bridge has shifted the dynamic from potential enemy to active adversary. Trump's tariffs may not target Russia directly, but his broader agenda securing energy dominance and industrial self-sufficiency could squeeze Russia's own resource-driven economy. Trump's trade wars carry an eerie resemblance of the protectionist policies of the early 20th century. Back then, tariffs like the US's Smooth Harley Act of 1930 triggered retaliatory measures, choked global trade, and deepened the Great Depression. The consequences were catastrophic, setting the stage for economic despair and eventually global conflict. Today's landscape isn't identical, but the parallels are hard to ignore. Add in Europe's military build-up, the creeping liberal fascistization of its bureaucracy, and its revanchist ambitions of the nations nursing old grudges. When you've got volatile mix, Trump's tariffs might be the match. The rest of the world could be the tinder. And it's a high-risk bet. Love him or hate him, Trump's latest move is a gambit of economic proportions. If it works, the US could emerge as an industrial powerhouse once more, its energy reserves locked down and its debt tamed. His allies in the financial markets will toast their profits, and his base will cheer the return of Made in America. But if it fails, or if the world pushes back too hard, the fallout could be seismic. Retaliatory tariffs, fractured alliances, and the emboldened axes of adversaries might leave the US more isolated than ever. For now, the stage is set and the Trump is the ringmaster. The rest of us, we're just watching this circus unfold, waiting to see if this is a triumph of American ingenuity or the opening act of something more chaotic.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal? They've taken advantage of us for many, many years. For many years, we've been at the wrong side of the ball, and I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be unbelievable. The thing that people have to talk about, we're up almost to $7 trillion of investment coming into our country, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. Our country's going to boom.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hott and Smolley put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
Almost 40 years ago, Donald Trump said other nations were ripping off the United States and laughing at them. On Larry King, let's watch it.
Well, it was very easy. I was tired, and I think a lot of people are tired of watching other countries ripping off the United States. This is a great country. They laugh at us. Behind our backs, they laugh at us because of our own stupidity
And China is to impose additional 34% tariffs on US goods from April 10th, according to the Chinese government agency. Facing US tough tariffs as high as 50% on their exports, most countries lack either the ability or to retaliate or resolve to engage a prolonged trade battle. China, summarising the financial markets reaction, stated, "They've spoken." The retaliatory tariffs imposed by China triggered a massive market downturn, with the S&P 500 plummeted 6%, a drop that erased $5 trillion from its market cap in just 2 days. This sent Wall Street's fear gauge soaring to a 5-year peak. Those expecting Federal Reserve Chairman Powell to introduce measures to mitigate the economic fallout were mistaken. Now some Belarus news. Treason. 3 Minsk residents charged with treason. 3 individuals from the capital of Belarus have been accused of treason after allegedly collaborating with foreign intelligence services for several years. They are said to have supplied these agencies with fabricated information about the policies of the Republic of Belarus. This covert operation was reportedly overseen by foreign funds and was later weaponized as disinformation campaign against the country, described as an aggressive information bomb targeting Belarus. May 9th Parade. Parade units set to participate in the May 9th Parade in Minsk, Belarus, completed their training at the Lipki airfield. So join us as we stream the parade live on May 9th, so don't miss that. Here's some video.
Main parade in the Minsk micro-district. The elevator is boiling. Here at the training ground, a mechanized column of 50 units of equipment is preparing for the solemn procession.
And the 5th game of the KHL league in Minsk. An on-show Dynamo Minsk dominates CSK in the Gagarin Cup playoff. Game 5 was a 7-0 victory. The match concluded with a shocking 7-0 scoreline in favour of the home team, giving Dynamo Minsk a 3-2 lead in the series. The Bison will now head to Moscow for the next game on April 5th, which was last night, and they won again. So now they go off into the quarterfinals. Let's watch some of this.
Серия продолжилась в Москве. Беспрецедентная по накалу страстей, эмоциональная и жесткая борьба. Достойная финала. Мы были на чужой территории, но играли с феноменальной поддержкой. Сопернику удалось сравнять счет с Сирией, и мы начинаем с нуля. Но мы начинаем дома. И здесь, с вашей поддержкой, мы уже побеждаем. Давайте сделаем это снова. Команда в круг, болельщики на трибунах. В одном звене. Мы знаем силу Минска-Арены. Мы дома. Мы Динамо. Ставки высоки как никогда. Плей-офф. Раунд первый. Игра первая. Поехали.
National anthem of the teams were played before the game. First, the Russian one for the CSKA Moscow team, and then the Belarusian anthem for Dynamo Minsk. This is just after one of the goals. These two videos at the end of the game. You can see the score there, 7-0. Minute to go. Thirty seconds. And as I said, last night they won again, so they won the that series against CSKA Moscow, and they're in the quarterfinals. And this week, a shot was fired in Minsk in the memory of the exploits of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War and the fallen defenders of the fatherland. A single blank shot from the artillery gun thundered in Minsk and in Brest at exactly 12 noon. Just watch the video. This is near the Great Patriotic Museum. And in the chat, Team America 1776 said under Obama he fired 645,000 federal workers. Obama deported 3.2 million illegals. Obama funded $32 billion to Israel. Lib outrage is 1,000% paid for propaganda. Think Smith-Muntz Act passed by Obama. Thanks for that. Let's get back into... And let's move over to the EU. Hungary and Serbia military alliance. Serbia and Hungary have signed an agreement to work together more closely on defence and military matters. This deal is a step towards building a military alliance between the two countries. The defence partnership between Serbia and Hungary is a key part of their overall cooperation. Serbia's president said that compared to other countries in the region, Serbia and Hungary have the strongest and most active defence relationship with many important joint projects. He shared these comments after meeting with Hungary's defence minister. And US President Vance criticises Europe's view on Russia as the main threat. Vice President Vance has argued that Europe is misguided in identifying Russia as its primary threat. He stated the real threat is to Europe, isn't China or Russia, it's their own internal issues. A migration policy that undermines Europe's cultural foundation, an economic policy that hampers competitiveness, and the flawed security policy. The European leaders claim Russia is the world's greatest threat, yet they continue to purchase billions in Russian gas while allocating just 1% of their GDP to defence compared to US's 3 to 4%. In Europe, their actions simply don't align with their rhetoric. Vance also pointed out to the case of Marine Le Pen, noting that despite her leading in the polls, authorities are attempting to imprison her on what he called a minor charge unrelated to her directly, but rather involving her employees. He criticised the move in an effort to jail her and exclude her from the election, declaring, "That's not democracy." Let's listen to him.
We have to appreciate that the greatest threat to Europe is not, China or Russia. The greatest threat to Europe is from within. It's migration policies that destroy the fundamental cultural bedrock of Europe. It's economic policies that make them less competitive. It's national security policies. I mean, these guys, on the one hand, their leadership I'm talking about, say that Russia is the biggest threat in the entire world. Meanwhile, they buy billions and billions of dollars of Russian gas, and they spend 1% of their GDP on defense, while we're spending 3 or 4% of our GDP. The rhetoric in Europe just doesn't match the reality. And then they act like in some polls and over an incredibly minor charge that implicates, by the way, her staff, not even Marine Le Pen herself. They're trying to throw her in prison and throw her off the ballot. Look, that's not democracy.
So Marine Le Pen's exclusion from the 2027 French presidential race following a court case that has been dubbed her Trump moment could prove to be the EU's most significant existential mistake in its history. This incident surpasses other anti-democratic manoeuvres, such as forcing France and Ireland to hold second referendums when initial results didn't align with their outcomes, or the most recent cancellation of Romania's presidential elections after the anti-establishment candidate appeared poised to win. This move against Le Pen is likely to backfire, producing unintended consequences for both Paris elite and Brussels officials. Far from weakening her, the case may bolster Le Pen's support, potentially bringing the political establishment to its knees. The Trumpian moment that led to the decisive victory for Donald Trump in the US could replicate itself in France, amplifying her far-right movement. The case against Le Pen is widely seen as a sham, primarily due to the EU's hypocrisy, which undermines its credibility on multiple fronts. And in Germany, major corporation bankruptcies surge. The number of bankruptcies among companies generated annually revenues of 10 million euros or more has risen sharply. In 2022, it was 227 companies. In 2023, it's 279. 2024, 364. 2025, 455 companies. This stark increase highlights the deepening economic turmoil in Germany, vividly illustrating the country's financial decline. The new German government has called for Hungary to be punished for Viktor Orban's anti-democratic policies. They want the EU to withhold funds and suspend Hungary's voting rights. The EU has become a full-blown dictatorship in front of our eyes. And speaking of the European Union, it's bankrupt, declares Malaise Polska. According to the article Malaise Polska, the EU has experienced a massive annual capital outflow of 300 billion euros as both individual and institutional investors shift their funds into assets outside the region. The primary driver for this capital flight is skyrocketing cost of energy, which has surged 240% since 2021. This crisis is combated by a drastic 29% drop in foreign direct investment. The EU is bankrupt, the article states. In this context, Europe's push to increase aid to Ukraine appears utterly reckless. The EU doesn't even have a cent to spare for that. Still in the EU, there's a failed terrorist attack in Amsterdam. Due to the attacker's mistake. These videos show that what the police describe as a failed terrorist attack in Amsterdam, where the car bomb didn't detonate properly. This comes just after the mass stabbing in the Dutch capital. Camera footage shows that the fire in the dam started after the explosion in the car, and after that time, quite a few people were in the vehicle. Near the vehicle, sorry.
What the fuck, jongen. Dit is helemaal gewekt, jongen. Het was gewoon een aanslag of zo, gast. We hebben gewoon... Wat de fuck gebeurt hier, man? We zijn gewoon aan een aanslag ontsnapt, hè? Hé? Ik ben niet zo ontsnapt. Waar is dit dan? We zijn er met jou mee, of niet? We hadden nog over gisteren. Het is ook...
And some more chats. Fanny Shishimi says, have a blessed Sunday and follow me for a daily millennia and MAGA. And Zara Woman said, may you guys follow my channel. We certainly will. Let's get back to the show. And the Times newspaper in the UK reports that British police are making more than 30 arrests a day over offensive posts on social media and other platforms. Thousands of people are being detained and questioned for sending messages that cause annoyance, inconvenience, or anxiety. Custody data obtained by the Times shows that officers are making about 12,000 arrests a year under the Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003 and Section 1 of the Malicious Communications Act 1988. The acts make it illegal to cause distress by sending grossly offensive messages or sharing content of an indecent, obscene or menacing character via the internet, telephone or post. Officers from 37 police forces made 12,183 arrests in 2023, the equivalent of about 33 per day. This marks almost 58% rise in arrests since before the pandemic, and in 2019 forces logged 7,734 detentions. The statistics have provoked criticism from civil liberties groups and Free Speech Union and Big Brother Watch that authorities are over-policing on the internet and threatening free speech using vague communication laws. Let's get some Ukraine news. Zelensky, the dictator, acquires $1.6 billion stake in a South African mining company. The Ukrainian, not president, but a dictator, Zelensky, has shifted focus from rare earth minerals agreement with the US, opting instead for a major investment in South Africa's mining sector. He secured a control of 51% stake in Northam Platinum Limited, the country's leading platinum producer, in the deal valued at $1.6 billion. This acquisition places Zelensky at the forefront of a dominant player in the global mining industry. And we're talking about him, not Ukraine, him himself. Northam Platinum Limited also produces palladium, rhodium and other critical metals, positioning Zelensky to tap into one of South Africa's most profitable economic sectors. The deal was announced just 1 week ahead of his scheduled visit to South Africa on April 10th and is already being celebrated as one of the most significant mining transactions in the region in recent years. Let's watch this news report on that.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to visit South Africa and meet President Cyril Ramaphosa on April 10th. But his arrival is already surrounded by controversy following news that he has purchased a controlling stake in Northam Platinum Ltd, one of South Africa's leading platinum mining companies. Sources close to the transaction confirm that Zelensky, through a network of holding companies, secured a 51% stake in Northam Platinum. The price is estimated to be around 27 billion South African rands or $1.6 billion US. Some speculate that Zelensky's visit to South Africa is not merely diplomatic, but also strategically tied to his new business interest. Meanwhile, workers at Northam Platinum Limited have expressed mixed reactions. Some of them fear potential restructuring and job losses. The SABC crew managed to speak with one of the miners at the Zonderrein Platinum mine after the end of the shift.
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, we were told the company changed ownership, but it will not affect us as workers. And they say the new owner, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
The National Union of Mine Workers has called for urgent discussions to ensure that the deal does not negatively impact employees.
And Trump has talked about the Ukraine not signing the rare earth
Zelensky,
deal.
by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. And if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems. We made a deal on rare earth. And now he's saying, well, you know, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems.
And let's have a look at the latest negotiations and peace with the Russian...
You said over the weekend, or indicated over the weekend, some frustration with him. How serious are you about imposing oil sanctions on
No,
Russia?
I want to see him make a deal so that we stop Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and other people from being killed. But mostly it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. They're losing at least 2,500 human beings, beautiful human beings, a week. And I wanted to stop. And some people would say, why do you worry about Russian soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers? I worry because it's like, they're just like you people. They're like us. They're like all of us. So I want to make sure that he follows through. And I think...
Interesting, he doesn't care about people in Gaza getting murdered.
He will. I don't want to go secondary tariffs on his oil, but I think, you know, it's something I would do if I thought he wasn't doing the job. I did. So I think he's going to live up to what he told me, and I think he's going to fulfill his part of the deal. Now, then you have Zelensky, and hopefully he's going to live up. I see he's trying to renegotiate the rare earth. We made a deal for rare earth. It was all done. And I heard through you, I haven't spoken to them yet, but through you, I heard that they're now saying, well, I'll only do that deal if we get into NATO or something to that effect. Well, that was never, number one, discussed. Number two, I think it's going to be very, long before Putin, they said you're not going into NATO. And it could be, that's probably the reason the war started.
Let me note that key people in the Trump administration are willing to address the entire spectrum of Russia-US partnership issues. They would like to address the geopolitical issues that we have. They hear the Russia's position, and Trump administration is different from the Biden administration because it hears Russia's position and understands our concerns. Of course, there are disagreements on a number of issues, but there is dialogue. And we believe that this dialogue will help us overcome these differences.
I'm interested in discussion about specific sanctions relief or taking sanctions off. The scale of the sanction regime put on to Russia, not just by the U.S., but really the entire Western world, is there's no precedent for it. Do you talk to U.S. officials saying this would be helpful, this would be something that we would appreciate?
No, actually not at all. Because first of all, many Russians believe that sanctions actually have been good to transition Russia from dependence on the West. And if you look at our GDP growth, it's still 4% last year versus around 1% for Europe. And our debt to GDP is 18% versus another around 100% for Europe. So Russian economy has done well, and we don't ask for any sanction relief. I think what we see is that some U.S. businesses want to go back, and if they want, as part of going back, to have some sanctions relieved, I think that is a good move to be done, but it's a good move for America. So I think at this point we are not asking for any sanction relief. We are just discussing that if America wants to have more business with Russia, and by the way, there are 150 American companies still in Russia, with 70% of them doing business for more than 25 years, then of course U.S. can do so.
Sorry about that. Small technical fault there. Just give me a second and I'll just get us back up and running properly. Hey, here we are. Sorry about that again. Here we go. So, Greenpeace faces potential collapse after North Dakota court ruling. A North Dakota court in the US has ruled against the international environmental group Greenpeace, finding it guilty of conspiracy, defamation, obstructing commercial activity. The lawsuit is brought by Energy Transfer, a pipeline company, followed protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. The court ordered Greenpeace to pay $660 million in damages to Energy Transfer. Greenpeace has stated the massive fine poses a severe threat to the organization's future and could even jeopardize its survival. And Russia, UFOs. A chilling declassified CIA file reveals aliens committed revenge massacre after the UFO was shot down. Give me a second and I'll just grab that article. Back onto me. There we go. In the Daily Mail online, it said, chilling declassified CIA files reveals aliens committed revenge massacre after after the UFO was shot down. There you go. And in a bone-chilling document declassified by the CIA, they exposed the alleged massacre by aliens from a crashed UFO who turned the entire military unit into stone. According to the report, Soviet troops shot down a flying saucer hovering over the Soviet military unit in Siberia roughly 35 years ago. And it says what happened next was terrifying in the document, summarizing in the 250-page top-secret file acquired by US intelligence agents. Witnesses said 5 aliens climbed out of their wrecked craft, combined themselves into one creature, exploded into a burst of intense energy, and turned 23 soldiers into solid rock. Believe that if you could do. There you go. Here we go. And onto some tech news. Let's get back into that. And let's get back into tech news. Sorry about that. In China, autonomous stores on wheels you can call via an app. Is it a great idea? Let's have a look. Yeah, they carry 240,000 litres of stuff. You can just order and pay with your phone. You can travel up to 50 kilometers an hour with a 100-kilometer range. Have 30-second battery change, keeps them running all day. These wheel convenience stores come from Neolix. Expects to deploy more than 1,000 self-driving vehicles in, it's 2019, that's a while ago. There you go. Yeah. Ever seen them before? And in Japan, Kawasaki is making a robo-horse. Yep.
Kawasaki Heavy Industries today. Hydrogen-powered quadruped robot exhibited at Osaka Kansai Expo. I've published Corleone. A conceptual model that assumes a mode of transport for the year 250th. Straddling like a horse. Operate by moving the center of gravity. Even in mountainous areas where driving on tires is difficult, with machine support, this means you can drive very safely.
What do you think? Would you get a robo-horse from Kawasaki? And in China, flying taxis are going live. You can get a flying taxi now. Wow. Mobile autonomous stores, robo-horses and flying taxis. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Interesting. Well, folks, that's a wrap for Live Show 124, Dr. Strangelove. How I learned to stop worrying and love the wars. We've been through a ringer tonight, Trump's war flip, those shady deaths in Lithuania, the New York Times Ukraine fiction, tariffs shaking things up, Yemen's war crime ? And the wild ride of the EU, Ukraine, Belarus, and the CIA UFO bombshell. If your head's spinning, good. That means you're paying attention. So I'm signing off from Minsk, Belarus, where it's now pushing past 10 past 9 p.m. on the April 6th, 2025. Thanks for sticking with me live. None of this happens without you. And if you liked what you heard, smash a thumbs up, share this on your socials, and subscribe if you don't miss the next one. And keep those comments coming in when we're live in the chat. And for the next live show, I'll have a special guest who is the author of the book, The Natron Theory. This is the theory that stone blocks in Egypt, Peru, Lebanon, etc. are all cast and not cut. I'll just show you that. Oh. Give me a second. Just get rid of Mr. Trump here. There you go. So the theory is these are all cast like concrete, not cut into, and that's what the interlocking area is. But come to the next show and find out. This one show you're not going to miss, hopefully. So the world's a mess, but we're cutting through the noise together. Stay sharp, question everything, and I'll see you next time. This has been Live Show 124 with no stars required. Good night, good afternoon, or good morning wherever you are, and don't let the bastards grind you